going to kick things off. It's Paul Wynne speaking. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take you through the first part of this short presentation, and then I'll hand over to Arthur and finally Brad, and then we'll move into the Q&A session, as Matt says. If we can move on to the next slide, I think Brad's controlling the slides. The first point really is that the MDR ISO 13485 and the FDA now require evidence of competency of those involved in sterilisation, but the regulations do not define competency. Annex 7 of the MDR sets out the requirements to be met by notified bodies, and section 3.2 of Annex 7 sets out the requirements to be met by notified notified bodies. So section 3.2 of Annex 7 addresses the qualification criteria in relation to personnel. It states that notified bodies shall establish and document qualification criteria, including knowledge, experience, and competency. It relates to various functions, including the evaluation and testing. Areas include sterilisation. ISO 13485 clause 6.2 refers to human resources and requires that personnel performing work affecting product quality should be competent. The common theme here is that there is an obligation to ensure competency, but the competency is not defined. The 2017 MDR came into force obviously in 2017. The transition period actually ends on the 26th of May 2026, so next Wednesday. Next slide, please. So what are the objectives for the SfSAP? It can be defined, I think, in the four key areas: defining competency. Secondly, to encourage and to create a career path for sterility assurance professionals. The third thing is to support training and development organisations to improve the overall quality of training and learning. And the fourth area, to promote programs that test and evaluate competency. Next slide. So when we're looking at what competency is, we quickly came to the view that there are three key components to this: knowledge, understanding, and expertise. And expertise can be broken down into demonstration and execution. So the first two of those require education, and the second two require experience. So we're going to be looking at this in terms of the linkage between education is with the education delivery organisations, and the second part we're looking at using the AAMI CISS certification programme. There are four key communities here that we can identify. One is supporting industry to provide certification approach that's high quality, low price, and supported by the regulators. It's supporting the regulators themselves because they've then got an objective method of ensuring sterility assurance professionals are certified. I think it's really important one here is supporting sterility assurance professionals. It's become evident already that most people who are experts actually have difficulty defining how they became experts. And so it provides a really useful career track for people that are coming into the, and for those wishing to maintain their competency. And it helps the training organisations, the EDOs, because it will inform the content of the programmes that they're putting out and hopefully improve the overall quality of the education and training programmes. Next slide. So what is the SfSAP? We quickly came to the conclusion that we wanted it to be a collaborative venture, but we didn't want it to have any conflicts of interest. So we decided that it should have its own legal existence, its own form, so that people could go back to their organisations, but with a very clear message as to what it is and what its goals are. So it's a company It's a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee without a share capital. It's been established in the UK simply because I was in the UK, and you know the process through which we go, and it's relatively easy and not too burdensome. It's therefore got a formal constitution with clear objects or objectives as to what we're trying to achieve. The initial funding was provided by AAMI, and ASTM, and that was used for three things really. It was used to create a brand identity, it was used to create the legal entity, and it was used to create a website. At the moment, we also wanted it to be open access and collaborative. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had access to it and that we could use it to build up a community of people who see themselves as being sterility assurance professionals. So we're going to use a variety of liaison mechanisms to get good engagement across a broad spectrum of industry. And very quickly, we've got essentially the board, AAMI, AAIA, and ASTM, so the three on the right that you'll recognize. SAP that's the Sterility Assurance Professional. And really the driving force initially behind this was Arthur Dunbar, that's going to speak next. And Arthur sits on the board along with, so there's at the moment there's myself, Arthur, and Brad. And there will shortly be an addition from ASTM. And that links in with really where the workhorse is. The most of the leadership and decisions have been coming through the steering committee that Arthur's going to explain how that fits into the structure on the next slide. So I'm going to hand over now to Arthur.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm Arthur Dunbar. Well, driving down from the board is the steering committee, which is set up as 6 different working groups. And we have what we call the education and certification, which is, we call that the training and learning effectiveness working group. So how good is the training and how effective is it being delivered to those of us that want to learn? And then we have the stakeholder communities, the medical device, the pharmaceuticals, contract sterilizers, and the regulators as well. And all of these feed into the framework which is being created by the various working groups. The framework is set up to deliver the requirements of the Mdsap and MDR competency requirements, as Paul described earlier. And then the Mdsap participants are all those organizations you see there. So there's a connection between regulators, notified bodies, national regulators, and the sterilization community. So our working groups are set up and aligned with the requirements of the competencies defined by Mdsap. So the microbiology, packaging and sterile barrier systems, environmental and contamination control, and routine terminal sterilization. So SfSAP aligned itself so that the outputs of the working groups are delivering on the requirements of Mdsap. The regulatory requirements are also to be delivered by the working groups through what we call learning frameworks and learning outcomes. There are 6 working groups which consist of 55 different people and 30 different healthcare companies. This is an example of, not an example, this is the Mdsap framework, which clearly describes the competencies and requirements for auditors. And this is one of the questions we had as the Society for Sterility Assurance Professionals. Not only do we as sterilization experts and professionals have to be competent, what about auditors? How do the auditors themselves, what framework do they use? How do they demonstrate that they're competent in auditing the sterilization technology that they're going to be auditing? So the output from the working groups are the frameworks. So we have the curriculum, and we have the learning outcomes. And as you can see in the slide, these are directly linked to the requirements of MDR, of how people should be able to demonstrate competency in their area or modality of sterility assurance. And again, these same frameworks are also used to address the requirements of 13485 clause 6.2. So the text highlighted in blue are the key areas that these frameworks address and help organizations, help auditors, help the community demonstrate that they have a clear career pathway, and also that they have training plans and have a clear journey in achieving competency in your particular role within sterility assurance. So the liaison groups, one of the reasons we created the liaison groups was to interact with the wider community. So the medical device and pharmaceuticals, contract sterilizers and regulators was to harmonize all the frameworks and utilization of the frameworks across all communities. We also need feedback from the communities. What's happening out there? Are you finding them useful? How can we better influence what happens with the regulators and their understanding of the technical requirements of sterility assurance, and deployment of the frameworks across all different communities. So we're all benchmarking and assessing ourselves against the same standards and same requirements. The other liaison community is the Training and Learning Effectiveness Working Group. Now, this working group is specifically linked to the education delivery organizations, and this converts the frameworks that are generated into tools that the education delivery organizations can use in order to determine what training to give in what areas. And one of the things we thought was critical was the feedback to the EDOs, feedback to the community of how effective is the learning that's being given from these education delivery organizations. And I'm sure some of you have been on experience, you've gone on a course and they just give you lots and lots and lots of information, but how effective are you taking in that information? Are you using that information in the right, in your day-to-day job? So the Training and Learning Effectiveness Working Group is working with EDOs in order to ensure this harmonization in learning and use of those skills within the community.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for allowing Arthur and Paul and I to talk about some of the work of SfSAP. I wanted to take what Paul and Arthur have laid out and put it in a little different form for you to see and understand just exactly what we're doing and how we're thinking about it. So this concept of operations really takes the goals that Paul described, really supporting industry, making sure that they have high quality, cost effective ways to meet the regulatory requirements, meeting regulatory needs to have an objective method to ensure sterility assurance professionals are qualified and certified, providing that career ladder and pathway that they described for our professionals. And then with EDOs, providing that framework that allows them to develop courses that are in alignment with the design that SfSAP is creating. To talk about a little bit about the internal workings of the organization, the working groups that Arthur described are hard at work. Those 55 experts are working week in, week out to really develop first the fundamental knowledge needed to be described as qualified. And As we progress, we have a clear interest in also defining the mid-level and senior level of the sterility assurance profession, but we're starting out with the basics, the foundations. What comes out of this, the framework that comes out of this, is being offered to education delivery organizations like ASTM, like PDA, like AAMI, and many, many others, so that they can take a look at the training they already provide and might want to provide, and design that to be aligned with really what is the state of the art, as well as what is harmonized globally by SfSAP. And then we, on the back end, are utilizing the AAMI's certified industrial sterilization specialist certification to be the final credentialing for this framework and people's passing of that. This was selected for a few reasons. One, it can be accessed anywhere globally, which is an important step. It also can be viewed in a variety of languages. And so all of that ability to scale is quite important to us. And SfSAP has a member that is a liaison to the committee that guides the development of the CISS. As everyone knows, certification exams are living documents. They're constantly being adjusted as our industry evolves, and we're certainly wanting to do that. And so SfSAP is helping to guide that development, which is really important to make sure all of this threads and aligns. Let me pause there because I'm paying attention to the time, and maybe turn it back to our moderator, see if there are questions from the audience for Paul, for Arthur, or me.
Thank you guys so much for that presentation. There are indeed some questions coming through the live polls and Q&A feature here, quite a number of them. So we will take them in kind. The first one I wanted to kind of dive into here is, what's the takeaway for medical device manufacturers? What's the benefit of getting involved? And maybe a corollary to that question, what does involved in sterilization mean? Is this up to the individual company to decide? There could be a difference in interpretation here. Maybe Paul, I'll pick on you first.
I think you'd start by saying the regulations are clear in requiring manufacturers to establish criteria against which to establish competency. And the takeaway really is that they should benefit by using what's being generated from the SfSAP. They're benefiting from a collaborative exercise and access to many subject matter experts. So you're not having to come up with the process on your own dime, effectively. So it's that's really the benefit. It's collaborative, engages with the regulators, and avoids one of, there's enough complexity for manufacturers in terms of compliance. If they can share this one and get something that is harmonized, it's the best way forward, I think.
Thank you, Paul. Another question here, and I think, Arthur, you touched upon this a bit in your slide, or one of them. Can you provide a bit more insight on who's involved in the program and its organization?
Okay, so we have 6 working groups, as we showed earlier, which are aligned with the competency requirements of the Mdsap. These 6 working groups are made out of 55 experts, subject matter experts from a broad range of industry. We have companies such as Abbott, Baxter, J&J, BD, Zimmer, Nelson Labs, Sterigenics, Steris, a whole range of companies and interest groups, AAMI, ASTM, involved in creating this framework. So it's a true representation of industry. We also have the liaison groups, which give other members of industry, other companies which may not be involved within any of the working groups, an opportunity to express their views and give feedback into SfSAP. And with the involvement of AAMI, IIA, ASTM, and soon to include PDA, we have this access to a broad range of experts that the community can use in order to develop themselves within the area of sterility assurance.
Next question we have here, and I believe this one was asked while in your portion of the talk, Brad. How will the competency program influence training programs, and how will competency be evaluated and certified?
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, to be very clear, the way competency is being defined is through these working groups. This is not an easy step. As you can imagine, each company thinks about sterility assurance a little differently. And having those subject matter experts come together and really lay out what are those fundamental elements has been a true effort and a noble effort on their part on behalf of our whole field. So they're laying out those elements, and each of those 6 working groups reports up to a steering committee. And the steering committee really supports the different working groups in interacting with one another. An easy example that I think would resonate with most people is that microbiology has an impact on many of the other modalities. They think about it a little differently in each of those modalities. And so there's some opportunity for the experts in each of the working groups to provide feedback and input to the other working groups through the steering committee. Once that's done, once that framework is really built, it's being shared free. This is a nonprofit organization, shared with training and learning groups, so education delivery organizations, so that they can then develop that curriculum around the framework that Arthur described. And as Paul had described, the education really sits at this level, the knowledge and understanding. And so that's where EDOs get involved. Then for the demonstration and execution, we're using the CISS certification as that terminal certification, so that we have one test worldwide. That's being reviewed continuously to make sure that it's being adjusted and aligned to the inputs of those working groups from across industry. Does that help, Matt?
I think so. And there's another question here that I think relates to this ACI CISS certification possibly, but maybe you could clarify. What is the industry standard for showing competency? Is it attending annual conferences and making sure you keep up with trends? Are competency tests necessary?
So in the regulation, there's a requirement to demonstrate competency. So industry is going to have to answer this question to regulators. Each company has a decision point. They can take that on internally, develop their own programs, and try to articulate to regulators how whatever they developed really reflects the requirements of regulators. Or they could participate in SfSAP and collaborate on in a more global way, and really depend on and leverage some of the resources being put into this effort, and use SfSAP as kind of a third-party objective evaluation method for themselves. We think the latter is the way to go, because what it allows for regulators is a very clear credential that is known and has been developed across industry. So we think that's a much more effective, much more cost effective, much higher quality way to go about it. So we're working to fill that gap.
And there's a really interesting point here, because it's not, when we split knowledge, understanding and expertise, and Arthur will have more detail on this, I'm sure, but the expertise isn't just a tick box of saying, I've done a training course, or I've been, you've got to demonstrate that you understand. That's why the knowledge, anyone can get the knowledge, but the knowledge, it's fundamental to then prove that you understand the subject, and that even when you know and understand it, there is a big difference between knowing, understanding, and then proving that you have been through real world situations where you build up the true expertise. And I'm sure Arthur will amplify on that from real world experience.
Yep, and those things go into the demonstration. Demonstrate that you know and understand the science, and demonstrate you can execute the science. And it doesn't end there. Are you continuing to give back to industry? Are you participating AAMI, ASTM, PDA? Are you on training conferences? Are you giving presentations like we're giving here on our experiences within industry and giving feedback? So that is the competency model. It's not just about an exam, it's moving forward and developing yourself and developing new methods within industry.
And isn't it also, when you're looking at moving, one of the focuses of today has been how you go through a process of changing modality. And if you're going to change it, and the competency requires the ability to anticipate the problems that you're going to encounter and what questions you've got to ask. So it's that, and one of, it's really interesting listening to the steering committee and people debating, the boundaries of this, and trying to, and this is where it comes back to, there's real value, I think, in companies leveraging off this discussion and debate, because it's, as Arthur said, there's many companies and many individual subject matter experts that are discussing this, and it's not an easy exercise to try and put some structure and form and structure around this to get to the point that we can start to liaise with these, to go through the liaison process to get feedback. So it's complicated, it's interesting, but it's very much knowledge, understanding, and the expertise.
And another question here, maybe just to back up a little bit, and this is coming from Byron, maybe just to contextualize, how do you currently see manufacturers using training to meet competency requirements? Currently now, and I think you already touched on this, will competency be based on job function and or role?
Yeah, so maybe I can speak to that a little bit. Certainly, AAMI for years and years and years has had an industrial sterilization course and secondary and tertiary courses beyond related to different aspects of sterilization. So industry is used to doing this now. We do this sort of development now, but there's no assurance check that, as Arthur mentioned, that they can actually understand, demonstrate, and execute on that. So that's a really important addition that we're trying to tackle. Matt, I missed the second part of the question there. What was the second part of Byron's question? Nope, you're muted.
Will competency be based on job role or function?
Yeah, so this is a little bit like other programs that certainly in any organization and in any role, there's particular areas of focus and emphasis. But this SfSAP credentialing is really to say you understand the basics across the board, period. And so it isn't that any one person might utilize every single piece every day, but people grow and develop, change jobs, and move into different positions. So it really is important as a field that, as we say, somebody enters it, they enter it with a broad, basic understanding of the fundamental elements.
And there's a big difference we're seeing between, say, radiation processing and aseptic. As two examples, one of the reasons I think it's valuable for us to be engaged is that whilst we represent the irradiation community, so gamma, EB, X-ray, you know, many of our members and many of the people that provide the contract sterilizers are not, they are technology neutral. So they don't just limit themselves to irradiation. Some, and actually I think it's interesting that it goes back to some of the previous presentations, because you know, when you're partnering with people, when you're moving modality, you require an increasing, you know, manufacturers need competent sterility contract sterilizers to be able to be partnering with to deliver the changes and the broadening of the modalities that they're going to use. So I think the more that we can bring these different components of the healthcare industry together, this initiative by involving AAMI, AAMI, ASTM, PDA, and everyone else is a great way forward. I think great step forward.
And then finally, to just add to the end of that, is we all face auditors. And if we all have been through the same program, whether you're an auditor, whether you're a contract manufacturer, whether you're a contract sterilizer, we all know we're being judged against the same benchmark. And I think Byron and Bjorn talked about in Europe, when you're transferring sterilization modalities, there's one set of expectations based on another set of expectations. And I think the difference there comes in this competency and real understanding of what does industry think. And I think that's where this should be driven by, your understanding, your knowledge of the sterilization process.
And I think it also, Arthur, I think it helps enormously to provide individuals, people like yourself who are sterility assurance professionals, providing that framework and that roadmap for career development and for a career path is a really valuable addition to meeting the needs that manufacturers have in terms of compliance. It aids the conversation with staff members in terms of career development, and it gives people an easier roadmap to moving from one role to another. So I think everyone wins. I think it helps everybody.
We have one last question here in the live polls and Q&A, and then I'll want to open it up for anyone that wants to hop in and interact live with our panel. Are your certifications recognized by Nsai, BSI, etc.?
That is why we're engaging with regulators, because at this early stage when we're building the framework, we want to get regulators involved early so that they understand that this is not just an organization. As you see, we've got AAMI, ASTM. This is industry, and this is being created by industry to be defined by industry and those industry experts. So in the future, it should be recognized because industry recognizes it, and therefore auditors and regulators should recognize it, because they themselves will probably have to go through the same program for themselves to be able to demonstrate competency. So it's a win-win for everybody.